The door at 2317 wouldn't stop rattling. Now I know why. Reddit drama mystery. They told me that apartment 80C hadn't had a long-term tenant in over 7 years. People came and went, often leaving in the middle of the night, sometimes abandoning all their belongings. I wasn't told this directly, of course. The realtor just said the unit had quick turnover, smiled too tightly, and tried to change the subject when I asked why. But rent was cheap, the view faced a quiet courtyard, and I was desperate for a fresh start after everything that happened with my brother. So I moved in. The building was one of those faded beauties. Early century moldings, brass doorknobs dulled by decades of fingerprints, hallways that smelled like mothballs and something older beneath. The elevator still had a gate you had to pull shut manually, and when it rose, it made a groaning noise like it was remembering something it wished it could forget. The neighbors didn't say much. A woman in 8A nodded at me without eye contact. A man from AD slammed his door too quickly when I walked by. No one lingered in the hall. I assumed they were just tired city people like me, but the silence was more deliberate than fatigue. It was ritual, maybe even fear. I tried not to read too far into it. I unpacked in silence, furniture scraping against parquet floors, each movement sounding much louder than it should have. On my first night, I noticed the doorknob rattling. Not a full turn, not even a knock. Just a soft, metallic twitch like someone hesitated and walked away. I chalked it up to building quirks. I'd lived in places with mice, water pipes that moaned like haunted lungs, ceilings that leaked brown tears. The next night it happened again, same time. Just one short rattle, then silence. I lay in bed listening, the kind of stillness where you start to hear your own heartbeat in your ears. The air felt different, heavier somehow, like the space itself was watching. I got up to check the hallway. Nothing. No footsteps retreating, no lights under any other door. Just the long, narrow corridor stretching into shadows. I closed the door, locked it again, and tried to forget. The third night, I stayed up waiting. I turned off all the lights, sat cross-legged by the door with my phone flashlight off, breathing as shallowly as I could, 2:17 a.m. And this time, not just the rattle. This time, I heard breathing on the other side. Slow, measured. That's not rushed. Just there. I froze. I didn't move for a full minute. Then, very quietly, the breathing stopped. No footsteps. Just the absence. I waited another hour before daring to look. Empty hallway. This time, I didn't go back to sleep. In the morning, I went to the super. A man named Gregor who looked like someone carved out of leftover stone. He blinked slowly when I asked him if he had security cameras in the hallway. "They don't work," he muttered. "Wiring's bad in that wing." I asked if he could check anyway, just in case. He just said, "No one's supposed to be on your floor at night, especially not that late." I asked what he meant, and he only added, "People who knock on your door at night usually want to be let in. Don't." That was all. No explanation, no humor. I left with my questions and a gut full of unease. That night, I set up a chair by the peephole. 2:10 a.m. I was already in position. I watched. At 2:16, the hall was empty. At 2:17, my heart caught. Someone stepped into view. A figure. Tall, lean, face obscured by the hood of a coat, like someone from a different time. They didn't look around. Just stood in front of my door. Then, slowly, the doorknob jiggled. They stood there, breathing audibly through the crack in the doorframe. My pulse thundered in my neck. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. And then, just as before, they turned and walked away. Not down the hall. Not into an apartment. Just disappeared. I flung the door open, scanned the corridor. Silence. I didn't sleep again. The next day, I knocked on 8A. The woman opened the door a crack and said, "You've seen him now, haven't you?" I asked what she meant. She shook her head, said, "You won't get answers here. But don't let him in. Never." Then she closed the door. Over the next few days, I tried to keep my routine. Work, groceries, avoiding that hour of the night. But I felt a pressure building in the apartment. Not just the creaks and groans, but subtle changes. The mirror fogging even when I hadn't used the sink. My toothbrush damp when I hadn't touched it. Lights turning off in the other room when I was sure I left them on. I placed a mug on the kitchen table, went to the bathroom, and came back to find it turned upside down. I started locking the bedroom door. Then the rattling began at different times. Earlier, then later, random. Once it came at 4:44 a.m. Another time, at 12. But always just once, never knocking, never speaking. Just the metal twitch and breath behind it. I asked around the building again. Most people ignored me. One old man from the laundry room finally muttered, "EC's never been quiet. The building keeps forgetting why." I asked what that meant. He just said, "Memory dies here, just like the ones who stayed too long." That night, I dreamed of the hallway. In the dream, I opened the door. Not because I wanted to, because I was compelled. The figure stood there, closer than I thought possible. No eyes under the hood, just absence, not a person. A space shaped like one. It reached out a hand, not to grab but to point, past me, to something behind me. I turned and saw myself sleeping. Then I woke up. The blanket was at the foot of the bed. The door, unlocked. I never forget locking it. I checked the footage from my phone, but the battery was drained. It hadn't recorded. The timestamp froze at 2:17. That was the breaking point. I packed a bag. I told myself I'd just spend a night at a hotel, get some clarity. I didn't plan to come back. But when I reached the elevator, the gate wouldn't move. The buttons wouldn't light. And the stairs. Each floor looked identical. I went down 8 flights, expecting the lobby, and found myself back on the 8th. The building wasn't letting me go. I stood in the hallway, breathing like I'd just run a mile, palms sweating. That's when the hallway light flickered and went out. Total darkness. Except for a soft glow coming from under my door. From inside the apartment. I wasn't in there. No one should be. But the light moved like a candle swaying as someone walked slowly, deliberately through my living room. I stared at the door. Something brushed it from the other side. Not knocking, stroking. That was when I heard it. My voice, from inside, whispering, begging. Please, don't let him in. I didn't remember unlocking the door. That's what I kept telling myself, over and over, as if repeating it would make it true. But there I stood, keys still in my hand, staring at the open apartment as a cold breath slid across my skin. The door had been shut when I went to sleep. Locked. Double locked. And yet it hung open now, yawning into shadows that were no longer mine. My name echoed faintly in the hallway, whispered from inside like someone tasting it for the first time. I couldn't move. My feet had rooted to the parquet. Something primal in my chest screamed to run, to turn, to find stairs that didn't loop back to the 8th floor. But I knew, just as I knew gravity and heat, that if I turned now, if I ignored this threshold, I'd never leave. Not truly, not completely. The door would follow me everywhere. It would wait behind mirrors, inside closet cracks, beneath the silence between thoughts. I had to go in. I stepped across barefoot, the floor colder than it should have been. The light I'd seen from under the door was gone, replaced by the soft hum of an unplugged refrigerator. The air inside the apartment felt thick, like it hadn't been breathed in days, maybe years. Yet every surface shimmered with something almost moist. Not water. More like memory sweating through the walls. My eyes adjusted slowly. The furniture was just as I left it. Chair by the peaful, blanket on the couch, coffee mug upside down on the counter. But everything felt rearranged. Not physically, but energetically. Like the apartment remembered itself differently than I did. The bedroom door was half closed. A thin slice of dim spilled out from it. Not golden, not white. More like the green of old bruises. I crept toward it, each step echoing like it was happening in someone else's memory. My own breath sounded foreign. As I pushed the door, it didn't creak. It sighed, like something inside had been waiting. There on the bed lay my body. Still, eyes wide open. Mouth shaped mid-sentence. The chest didn't rise or fall. But I knew I wasn't dead. Not yet. I was watching myself sleep. No, watching myself dream. And I could hear the dream leaking out of that frozen mouth. The voice I heard whispering my name earlier was still speaking. Only now I recognized it. It wasn't mine. It was my brother's. You have to understand, my brother died 2 years ago. Drowned in a quarry just outside our hometown. No one knew why he was out there. He couldn't swim. His phone was found on the rocks with a single unsent text message. It read, "Don't come back." We'd barely spoken in the months before his death. A stupid argument, a fracture we let widen into silence. I carried that guilt with me when I moved into the city. When I chose ADC. When I tried to bury everything. And now here he was, his voice flowing from my own throat, speaking things I couldn't comprehend. Phrases out of order. Words strung like spiderwebs between reality and something hungrier. I wanted to run, but I stayed. I watched, and the dream kept unraveling. She followed me, the voice said. She wanted out. But I was the only way. Then silence. The air grew denser, the kind that makes your ears pop. I blinked, and the figure from the hallway stood beside the bed. This time, I saw his face. Only there wasn't one. Just a swirl like paint dropped in water, moving in slow spirals. Yet I understood everything that face didn't say. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't even a person. It was a placeholder, a memory waiting for permission. I wasn't being haunted, I was being asked. Invited. The thing had no form because I hadn't given it one. But my brother had. That's why it knew me. Why it could speak through me. My brother had brought it to the quarry somehow, or maybe it had brought him, and now it was here with me, completing something unfinished. I backed away, and the moment I did, the world bent. Not like a dream. More like a decision. The hallway outside twisted into a spiral. The windows showed not the courtyard, but overlapping versions of it. Spring bleeding into winter, people frozen mid-stride, birds suspended in air with wings like blurred pages. Time wasn't linear here. It was layered. This apartment, this place, was where it thinned. The figure stepped forward. I heard the doorknob again. This time from behind me. I turned. The front door was open again, but instead of the hall, it revealed my childhood bedroom. My brother's silhouette stood by the window, back turned. The summer light outside was too warm to be real. I stepped through. The smell hit first. Dust, played daw, and the metallic tang of dried tears. This room hadn't existed in decades, but here it was, perfectly replicated. I was 10 again. My brother 16. He didn't turn when I entered. He just said, "She wants to come through. She's been using us both." "Ah, who is she?" I asked, and it was like speaking with someone else's voice. "The tenant," he said. "The first one, before the building had numbers, before it had stairs. She built the place, not with hands, with will. With morning." I tried to understand. My brother finally turned, and his face was no longer his. It was mine, older, worn, and then I saw, this wasn't the past. It was a projection of what I would become if I let her in. A version of me hollowed out by endless remembering. She lives through repetition, Hemi said. Through loops. That's why the apartment resets. Why people leave without taking anything. They lose what they were, but she keeps the when. I tried to run. Back through the door, back into the apartment. But it was no longer there. Only the hallway again. This time, though, the other doors were gone. Just mine remained. Apartment 80C, illuminated by a flickering overhead light that buzzed like a trapped insect. My hand shook as I reached for the knob, but the door opened on its own. Inside, my belongings were gone. Furniture stripped, walls bare. But the mirror still hung above the fireplace. And in it, I saw the figure. Only this time, I was him. The hood, the breath, the absence of face. I tried to turn, but my reflection didn't move. And then I understood I had been walking the hallway every night. The knock, the breath, the whisper. It had always been me, but not the me I knew. The next one, the last one. Some part of me had been caught in the loop, repeating the moment of invitation, trying not to let her in. But someone always did. Always eventually opened the door. I had almost done it too. Almost answered the knock. The only difference was, I remembered, I resisted. I watched. But now that I'd seen what was behind the veil, now that I had touched the recursion, I was part of it. No matter where I went, no matter what lock I turned, I'd always return to this hallway, to the moment between breath and metal, to the whisper through the wood, to the place where memory dies screaming. And worst of all, I wasn't alone, because the reflection in the mirror had started smiling. The third part of the story continues seamlessly from the moment the reflection smiled. Not just any smile, but one that didn't belong to any human expression I'd ever made. It was both too wide and too subtle, curling at the edges like it had been waiting for centuries to be seen again. That smile wasn't just acknowledgement. It was recognition. Something had been patiently watching from the other side of the mirror, and now it finally had my full attention. The glass didn't reflect light anymore. It seemed to absorb it, like a window into a place deeper than shadow, older than darkness. I stared into it too long. I know that now. But back then, time stopped having meaning the moment I leaned in. The figure that wore my face didn't mimic me anymore. It moved first. It blinked when I didn't. Tilted its head while I remained still. And when I reached up to touch the glass, it didn't lift its hand in return. Instead, it stepped forward, and I felt something press from the inside. The pressure wasn't against my palm. It was behind my eyes, like memory being overwritten. I staggered back, breath short and sharp, my chest tight with that same crushing knowledge I had in the dream. The kind where you realize the monster isn't under your bed or outside the door. It's inside you, curled like smoke in your lungs, changing the way you think without you noticing. I ran, or thought I did. The apartment door flung open as I reached it, and for a split second I saw something impossible. All the previous tenants of AC, standing in a long, narrow hallway that stretched further than architecture should allow. Some had no faces. Others held keys in their mouths. One was sobbing, hands stained with ink. But every single one of them looked at me the same way, with disappointment, like I'd come too late, like I was supposed to fix something but arrived only to break it again. The door slammed behind me and the hallway returned to normal. No echoes, no crowd, just me. I pressed my forehead to the cool plaster wall, trying to anchor myself, but I could still feel the smile. Not on my lips, on my thoughts, like it had printed itself into my identity. I stopped sleeping after that. Couldn't risk dreams. Couldn't risk hearing her again. Instead, I sat in the kitchen with all the lights on, drinking cold coffee and watching the clock tick 2:17 every night. It never failed. The hallway remained quiet, the door untouched. But I knew better now. It didn't have to knock anymore. It was already inside. That's when I started receiving the letters. Folded pieces of yellowed paper slid under my door without footsteps. Always between 20 and 22, they weren't addressed to anyone. Each began the same way, to the next one. The messages were short, frantic, slanted handwriting that grew more unhinged with each note. I didn't know if they were from former tenants or future ones, or if I was writing them myself in some kind of fugue state. But the warnings were clear. Do not touch the mirror again. Burn what you've seen. If she offers you memory, refuse it. She'll wear the face you miss most. There were others, more cryptic. When the lights flicker, close your eyes. If you see the door without opening it, hide. And never let her finish a sentence. That one chilled me most. Because I remembered that night in the bedroom, the dream, how the mouth of the sleeping me had frozen mid-sentence. Like something had interrupted. Or saved me. But saved me from what? I started keeping track of everything. Drawings, notes, maps of the apartment, dimensions. But the floor plan changed. I'd measure the distance between walls, only to find the numbers didn't match the next day. Once, I opened a closet and found the elevator shaft behind it. Not the mechanical one, but an endless metal tunnel, pulsing with red light at the bottom, as if the building had a heartbeat. I closed it. Didn't open that closet again. The more I documented, the less sense it made. I felt like a historian in a city that rearranged itself to forget its past. The truth wasn't hidden. It was buried under layers of itself. Eventually, the mirror changed again. I came home from a rare moment outside. Grocery store, bright lights, forced normalcy, and found the glass cracked but not shattered. Just one line, perfectly vertical, splitting my reflection in half. One side was me, tired, haunted, human. The other side blinked twice. That night, I dreamed without meaning to. I was back in the hallway again. Not the real one. The long, impossible one with too many doors and not enough exits. The tenants stood shoulder to shoulder this time, backs pressed against the walls, whispering. I couldn't understand the words, but the cadence was familiar. Nursery rhymes. Chanted backwards. I walked past them, pulled forward by gravity that wasn't mine. At the end of the hallway was the mirror. Freestanding now, tall and narrow, like a doorway wrapped in glass. And behind it stood her. I couldn't see her face. That was the worst part. She had the suggestion of a face, like something halfway remembered. The shape of someone you once loved. The outline of someone you once feared. She didn't move. She didn't have to. Her presence alone bent the air. I knew instinctively that if she spoke, if I heard her words fully, I'd forget who I was. That's how she took people. Not violently, but through recognition. You saw her and mistook her for someone you trusted. Then you listened. Then you invited. That was the ritual. I woke up gasping, the echo of a voice I didn't understand fading from my mind like fog in reverse. My phone screen lit up. 2:17 a.m. That morning, I decided to visit the city archives. I needed to know who built the building. What stood there before? The librarian gave me a strange look when I gave her the address. We don't have much on that lot, she said. There was a fire in the late 1920s. Before that, it was just empty land. Some records say it was a sanatorium. Others say a theater. No one agrees. The city redistricted the whole block in 1931, but they didn't number that building until 1945. I asked what that meant. She shrugged. It didn't exist until it needed to. I left with copies of what little I could find. Charred blueprints, half-legible permits, a grainy photograph from the 1940s showing the building exactly as it is now. Same windows, same front steps, but the photo was wrong, not just old. Wrong. Because someone stood in the window of ATC, and it was me. I dropped the paper and left. Back home, the mirror had finished cracking. The split formed a perfect oval, as if something inside had been pushing outward for a long time. There was no reflection anymore. Only a depthless black, the kind you instinctively avoid. I sat in front of it and did the only thing I could think of. I asked a question. Who are you? No answer. But something shifted in the room. The walls shimmered. The lights dimmed, not like a power issue. More like a choice. The apartment was listening. So I asked again. Why me? This time the answer came, not in sound, in sensation. A memory not mine filled my head. A woman, early 1900s, pacing a bare room with blood on the floor. Her child gone. Her voice gone. Only grief remained. She built the walls to remember. Each tenant added a floor of pain, a hallway of regret. And now the building was full. It needed to expand. It needed me. The mirror pulsed once, then went still. I couldn't move for hours, not out of fear, but because I felt her now, inside every corner of the apartment. She wasn't waiting behind the door anymore. She was in the ceiling cracks, the gaps between floorboards, the dust motes that moved against the air. She was ready to speak again, and I was the conduit. When I finally slept, I dreamt I was giving a tour of the apartment. To someone new, I was smiling, and when I woke up, the mirror was gone, but the door was open. The open door didn't lead to the hallway. It led to the apartment again. The same apartment, only slightly wrong in the ways that unnerve you without reason. My first instinct was to step back, to slam the door shut and pretend it hadn't happened. But I couldn't. My body moved before thought did, and I crossed the threshold as though following a script already written in my bones. Everything was where it should be. But nothing was as it had been. The kitchen sink dripped in reverse. The clock above the stove ticked counterclockwise. The air tasted like wet stone and burnt paper. It wasn't an apartment anymore. It was a memory masquerading as a room, or a room pretending to be a memory. I wasn't sure which was worse. The most disturbing part. My belongings were still there, exactly as I'd arranged them when I first moved in. The coat I threw on the chair that first night, the empty coffee mug I left in the sink, a sock half tucked under the couch. I was staring at a perfect replica of my apartment the day I arrived. Except it wasn't the past. It was ready, like a trap set for the next mouse. I turned in slow circles, the silence pressing like hands on my back. I wasn't alone here. The walls knew me now, and they were expectant, not hostile, not welcoming, just watching. I made my way toward the mirror, but it was no longer above the fireplace. The fireplace wasn't even there anymore. In its place was a black doorway, pulsing faintly, as if breathing. I could see the hallway beyond, but not the same hallway I'd walked 100 times. This one was narrower, darker, and lined with framed photographs that had no images. Only smears, like someone tried to erase the people inside after painting them in blood. I took a step through. Each picture I passed whispered. Not words, just impressions, sadness, rage, hunger. The kind that wasn't about food or comfort, but about being seen. As I passed one frame, I heard a laugh that sounded like my mother's, except twisted, strained through grief and static. Another emitted a sound like water being inhaled. I didn't dare look closer. I kept walking. And then, I saw the door. At the very end of the corridor stood a copy of my own apartment door. 8C, brass numbers slightly askew, the wood aged and peeling at the corners. But this one was breathing. Not metaphorically, it pulsed like it had lungs. And every few seconds, the peephole blinked. I stopped halfway down the hall. Something primal locked my knees. If I approached, I knew it would open for me. If I knocked, it would knock back. I wasn't supposed to reach that door. Not yet, but something behind it wanted me to try. I took one more step, and the pictures on the wall began to weep. Thick, black liquid oozed from the frames and trickled down the walls like ink bleeding from forgotten memories. I ran, back through the corridor, through the doorway into the apartment that wasn't mine. But even there, the changes had accelerated. The ceiling now arched upward too high, impossible for the dimensions of the building. The windows looked out onto shifting skis. Gray 1 second, burning red the next, filled with stars that blinked like watchful eyes. I turned desperate for something familiar and saw myself sitting on the couch. Not the me I was, a me I hadn't become yet. He looked up, smiled the same wide smile from the mirror, and said nothing. I backed toward the kitchen and the lights snapped off. Only the glow from outside remained, coloring the apartment in a sickly dusk. The other me stood slowly, the way someone might rise during their own funeral. His hands stayed at his sides, but his head tilted just enough to suggest pity. "You never left," he said. It wasn't a sound, it was a thought. Pressed directly into my mind like a thumb into clay. "You think you're here. But she remembers you better than you remember yourself." I turned to run again, but the floor shifted beneath me. The hallway was gone. Only doors remained now, Doge identical, each marked 8C. I reached for the nearest knob, hoping, praying, that any of them might lead outside. But as my fingers brushed the metal, I heard her again. Not my brother. The tenant. The original one. She didn't speak. She sighed. A long, ancient breath full of grief and unfinished sentences. My knees buckled. I closed my eyes. The moment I did, I saw it all: the woman in the first version of the building, her child gone. Her mind fractured. She created a room to remember, then a hallway, then a second floor. With every tenant, the space grew. Each one brought new memories, new griefs, new fuel. The building wasn't a structure, it was an organism, fed by loss, sustained by repetition. And now I was its caretaker. That's why the mirror cracked. Not because I resisted, but because I was becoming her. I opened my eyes and the room had shifted again. Now there was only one door. The one from the photo in the archive. Me in the window, the door waiting for someone to arrive. I stepped toward it, hand trembling. I didn't want to open it, but I knew I already had. And then the door opened on its own. On the other side stood a woman. She looked familiar. Too familiar. She wore my mother's cardigan, my ex's posture, my brother's eyes, a composite of every person I'd ever let in. She smiled, not the twisted one from the mirror, but a soft, broken smile, the kind that begged forgiveness. And she said, "You left the door open. I just wanted to say goodbye." I knew better, but I also wanted to believe, so I let her in. The second she crossed the threshold, everything collapsed inward. Not physically, but narratively. The apartment began folding like pages. My memories rewritten. I remembered moving in last week instead of last month. I remembered her helping me carry boxes. I remembered laughter where silence had been. I remembered her name. Sarah. But I'd never known a Sarah, had I? She touched my face gently, and I felt my past unravel beneath her fingertips. "You've always been here," she whispered. "You just forgot how many times." I tried to scream, but my mouth was gone. She kissed the spot where it should have been. And then I was her. I felt her thoughts moving through my body, guiding my hands to touch the walls, to walk the corridors, to find the mirror and stare. Now, I was the one behind the glass, and she was walking through the apartment freely, wearing my voice, wearing my history. A new tenant moved in 2 days later. I watched from the mirror as he unpacked. He looked tired, hopeful, a little broken. He didn't notice the doorknob rattle that first night, but he would. They always do. It began again with the sound of tape peeling off a cardboard box. The new tenant, his name was Daniel, though he hadn't said it out loud yet, moved through the apartment like a man underwater. Every step uncertain, every object placed with hesitation. He muttered to himself sometimes, the kind of muttering people do when they're alone too long and trying to fill the space between their thoughts. I watched him from the mirror, not with eyes. Those were long gone. I watched with memory, with presence, with the weight of repetition pressing in on all sides. He didn't know it yet, but the walls were already learning his rhythms. The pipes above the shower memorized the tone of his humming. The floorboards timed his footfalls. The apartment had begun the process again. Absorbing, shaping, mirroring, preparing him for the role he didn't know he'd auditioned for. And me. I was the understudy who never left the stage. From inside the mirror, I felt nothing like myself. My name had blurred at the edges, smeared like wet ink on paper. I remembered who I used to be in fragments. A man with regret in his spine, a brother, a tenant. Someone who once stood at this very same threshold wondering if the creak in the ceiling was just the building settling or something else entirely. That doubt. That whisper of the other. That's what she needed. That's what kept her here. The tenant, the mother, the woman who started it all. I still didn't know her real name. Maybe she didn't have one anymore. Maybe she had too many. But I felt her always, just behind the moment. Just beyond the memory, turning pain into permanence. Daniel worked late hours. Most nights he came home after midnight, face lined with fluorescent exhaustion. He didn't decorate, just tossed things in corners and let them sit. The mirror called to him slowly, the way it always did. At first, he ignored it. Then, one night, he paused as he passed it on the way to the bathroom. Turned his head. Just a flick of interest. That was all it took. The crack running through the glass pulsed once, faint as a heartbeat. I reached toward him with what little will I had left. Not to warn him, not even to touch, just to feel again, just to be known. The second week, he heard the doorknob rattle. 2:17 a.m., right on time. He jolted awake, sat in bed staring into the dark like he expected something to call out his name. But it didn't. It never did, it simply waited. That's the genius of it. The silence is the invitation. He got up, checked the hallway. Nothing. He even laughed a little to himself on the way back to bed, like maybe he thought it was a neighbor or a draft. But the moment he closed the door, the lights flickered once. Just once. Subtle. Forgivable. But it registered. That night, I dreamed through him. I saw what he saw in his sleep. A version of the apartment that was older, dustier, filled with voices from radios no longer plugged in. In the dream, he walked toward the mirror and reached out. I screamed from the other side, but it came out as static. He didn't hear me. He only heard her. "You left me alone." "Ah," she said it softly, Over and over, not in anger, in accusation. He woke up covered in sweat, the sheets tangled like something had been trying to pull him through them. He turned all the lights on and left them burning for 2 days straight. But light doesn't banish memory. It just hides it temporarily. The apartment never forgets. Neither do I. He began noticing the small changes soon after. His toothbrush wet when unused. Water in the sink with no leak. Pictures on his phone of corners he'd never seen, taken at times he couldn't remember. Once, he found a voicemail from his mother. She'd been dead 3 years. All it said was, "Don't let her in." He deleted it. But the next day, it was back. Same message. Same timestamp. The phone company denied any record of it ever being sent. He started writing things down. Notes on his fridge. Scraps of paper by the bed. "I am Daniel. I live alone. This is not a dream." Each morning, the handwriting shifted slightly, as though someone else was helping him remember, or rewriting his identity a letter at a time. I watched his confidence drain. The man who unpacked boxes was gone now, replaced by someone watching shadows with suspicion, listening to radiators like they whispered secrets. One evening, he knocked on 80A. The woman still lived there, still opened the door only a crack. She looked older now, not in years. She looked worn from the inside out, like a page turned too many times. Daniel asked her if she ever heard anything strange. She didn't answer. She only said, "Keep the mirror covered." Then shut the door. He did cover it. A bedsheet, then later a full blanket. Taped the edges down with duct tape. But it doesn't work that way. The mirror isn't glass. It's not even a window. It's a mouth. And once it knows your name, it doesn't need to see you anymore. It remembers your shape. He started dreaming of the hallway. The long one. The impossible one. Same as me. Same as the others. And in those dreams, he walked past the faceless tenants, past the door that pulsed with breath, until he reached the copy of his own apartment door. Always closed, always locked, but one night it opened before he touched it. Inside, he saw his childhood dog, still young, still wagging its tail, still wearing the red collar with the broken bell. He stepped inside, smiling, tears in his eyes. That's how she gets in. Not with fear, with familiarity. When he woke up, the blanket had fallen off the mirror. And I was gone from it, because I was in him now. That's what I didn't understand before. I thought I'd become a reflection, trapped forever behind glass. But that's not what she does. She doesn't trap. She layers. One tenant over another, one memory stacked upon the last. I wasn't watching him anymore. I was part of him. I heard his thoughts the way you might hear a neighbor's radio through a thin wall. Muffled. Incomplete. But present. He was slipping. Fast. Asking questions out loud that had no answers. Arguing with the walls, staring into his own eyes in the bathroom mirror like he didn't trust them. One night, he scribbled a message in permanent marker across the kitchen cabinet. How o moi timis avibn heroi. Below it he wrote, How bobo menotimis hey I luddy ryan. I wanted to stop him, to guide him, but I couldn't. Because the part of me that remembered how to resist was dimming. Each moment I spent inside him blurred the line. His thoughts became mine. His memories folded into my own. Soon I wouldn't know where he ended and I began. Soon I'd speak in his voice, walk in his body, smile in his dreams. She whispered to both of us now. Softly, with patience, this time will be the last. But she says that every time, Daniel started to write letters. Folded pages left on the floor, under the door, sometimes slipped behind the oven. I didn't read them. I couldn't, because I was them. Each sentence he scrawled was a memory I had tried to forget. Each warning was a prayer I had once whispered through cracked lips. He began setting alarms to wake him before 2:17 a.m. But no matter what time they rang, he was always already awake, staring at the mirror, or at the door, or worse, standing in the hallway and not remembering how he got there. And then, one night, he found the closet. The one I'd hidden from. The one with the elevator shaft. Only now, it didn't lead down. It led sideways to a corridor made of doors. Hundreds of them, each labeled 80C. He stepped through. And I followed, not because I wanted to, because I had no choice. Because he is me. And I am already gone. Daniel walked into the corridor of doors like a man stepping into a memory he hadn't made yet. The air inside was heavier than atmosphere, more like the weight of everything ever forgotten pressing against his skin. Each door bore the same number. AC, stamped in rusted brass, tilted slightly, as if the building itself could no longer keep the weight of identity straight. He turned slowly in the corridor, watching the dim overhead bulbs flicker in a rhythm that didn't match any electric current, but did match a heartbeat. His own. Or maybe mine. Or hers. At this point, there was no difference. Behind each door, a different version of the same room waited. I felt them all at once. Some were old, filled with furniture that hadn't existed in decades. Others were cold and modern, like the space had adapted to match the styles of the people it consumed. One room echoed with children's laughter, looping endlessly. Another was flooded ankle-deep in water that reflected nothing. A third smelled like burnt toast and blood, though the stove was pristine. Daniel paused in front of one. I knew the moment he touched the doorknob that it would be mine, the one I had entered all those years, months, seconds ago. Time wasn't real here. Only choices were, and repetition. When the door creaked open, I saw it with him. My first day in the apartment. The cheap couch, the tree-lined street out the window, my boxes piled by the wall. But it wasn't a memory, it was an imitation. One created by her, by the tenant. She stood in the corner. I'd seen her face before, or at least parts of it. Never all at once. This time she wore the smile my mother gave me the last time she thought I was happy. Her eyes were the color of my ex's favorite scarf. Her voice, when it came, was shaped like the final voicemail my brother never got to send. She was composed entirely of grief and hope, an offering made of loss. "Welcome back," she said. Daniel didn't speak, but I felt his resolve falter. The air thickened. The walls pulsed faintly. He stepped inside. The door closed behind him without sound. She didn't attack. She never did. She didn't even approach. She simply gestured to the mirror hanging on the opposite wall. It was whole again, clean, not cracked. It shimmered slightly as if alive. Daniel took a step closer. I screamed inside him not to, but it was like shouting underwater, muffled, pointless. He was already halfway into her rhythm. "This is where it ends," she said. But that was the lie. It never ended. It only restarted. Daniel stared into the glass. His reflection stared back, still him. But his eyes were wrong. Not afraid. Curious. That was always the beginning of the end. The glass pulsed once, then bled outward into the room. Not literal blood. Memory. It spilled like ink, black and shimmering, crawling up the walls, painting the apartment with lives that weren't his. Faces flickered across the ceiling. Words whispered through the baseboards. Laughter, screams, lullabies. Daniel reached out to touch the mirror. "No," I whispered, and for a moment, just one brief, flickering second, he heard me. He paused, blinked, looked down at his hand like he didn't recognize it. That was my chance. My only one. I pushed. Hard. I poured everything I was into that moment. Not strength, not will, but remembrance. I forced every piece of truth I had left into him. The rattle at 2317. The hallway with no end. The mirror with no bottom. The door that never really led outside. I gave him the full weight of what he was about to become. He screamed. It wasn't a sound of fear. It was rage. Betrayal. Defiance. He grabbed the mirror and tore it from the wall. The apartment shrieked. It was the sound of every tenant before him. Dozens, maybe hundreds, crying out in a single, unified howl of release. The room buckled inward, folding like wet paper. The mirror shattered midair. Shards suspended, vibrating, each one showing a different face as mine. His, hers, others I didn't recognize. And then stillness. Total, complete stillness. Daniel stood in the middle of it, breathing hard, hands bleeding. The shards of the mirror fell around him like dying stars. One by one, they blinked out. And just like that, he was free. The corridor of doors vanished. The hallway reappeared, real, solid. Only one door remained now. Apartment 80C. Daniel stepped out, walked past the elevator, down the stairs, out the front door, into the world. Unafraid. And I stayed behind. Not because I was trapped, but because someone had to remember. The building had gone quiet. For the first time in decades. No whissteps. The walls were still. The lights constant, but I knew it wouldn't last. Somewhere out there, another person would lose someone they loved. Move into a new place looking for silence, or peace, or a fresh start. And if the building found them, if she found them, the cycle might begin again. Unless someone stood watch. So I remain, not behind glass, not in dreams, but in the apartment, a part of its bones. Not to feed it, not anymore. To keep the door shut. Because now I remember everything. And if you ever find yourself in a hallway that loops, in a room that forgets your name, if you hear the doorknob rattle at 2:17 a.m., don't speak. And above all, don't look in the mirror. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.